Arya, we can start right now. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. In this session, I want to invite Professor Steven LaValle, Professor of Robotics and Virtual Reality at University of Oulu. Steven LaValle is a Professor of Computer Science and Engineering, in particular Robotics and Virtual Reality at University of Oulu in Finland. He was a professor in Department of Computer Science at the University of Illinois. His research interest in robotics, virtual reality, sensor fusion, planning algorithms, computational geometry, and control theory. With regard to industry, he was an early founder and scientist of Oculus. The topic of this speech is billiard-like robots. Let them be unstable and unobservable. Dear Professor Steven, hello, you're welcome.
Okay, hello. Thank you. Make sure I can share my screen. So thank you very much for the introduction. Salam, subahey.
Good morning.
I cannot speak too much in Farsi, but I want to say that I very much appreciate this invitation, and I'm a little bit sad that I cannot make it to Tehran in person. The last time I was in Iran a few years back, I had a wonderful time. I visited Shiraz, Isfahan, and Tehran with many students and professors being excellent hosts. So I miss the food and the people and the culture. So I look forward to some future time. But this is a happy event for me to come and give this talk, but it's also a little bit sad because I can't be there today.
We hope to see you in Tehran next year after the pandemic.
Exactly. So let me share my screen here and put my slides up. Okay. So the work I'll talk about today was done over several years. Here I just list the credits of funding, mostly coming from the US, and mostly the work was done by a lot of my students who are listed here, as well as some professors of mathematics. So typically, in a mobile robotics context, what do we do? Okay, so we develop some kind of stable vehicle system, and then the system should perform some kind of geometric mapping or SLAM. Then you want to do motion planning, maybe plan collision-free paths for the robot. Then you have some localization or state estimation system with sensor fusion that lets the robot know where it's at all times, so you can make some kind of feedback loop. Then you deploy a feedback control law to track the target trajectory that you would like the robot to follow. If you have multiple robots, then you have communication and coordination issues. So that's very classical kind of view, which I'm going to steer away from in this talk. So check the time. So going a little bit closer to the style of talk I'm giving, there's been swarm robotics for quite a number of years, where the robots have a little bit less information, less capabilities. Perhaps they sense each other, and they may control their motion with respect to neighboring robots. So each one looks at what the neighbors is doing, and they have some kind of rules for guiding them. And the robots themselves become some kind of landmarks. Well, here's my simple robot. Which does some kind of, let's say, intelligent exploration. I'll speed it up a bit too, but I show you the numbers there so you see how much I'm cheating. There's a long history of speeding up robotics videos. So this robot's trying very hard to explore its environment, so it seems. Right? Even gets into every little pocket there. So how did we design this robot? What's in its brain? What capabilities does it have? Well, it's not given any map of the environment in advance. It doesn't have any capabilities of estimating position. It has no even system identification. We're not even sure what it is as a dynamical system. It has no sensors. It doesn't even have a computer or any digital devices. It just has a single motor oscillating at about 2 hertz. So it's just one of these, a simple toy that you can buy for almost nothing in a market, with just a weight on it and a motor that makes it spin around in circles very slowly. So if you put that on the floor, then it seems to do something almost useful that would require much more complicated engineering systems to solve. and to try to beat it. Of course, you could beat it, but it takes a lot more effort. So I would argue that it does something reasonably nice. It's very unstable, but that's a good behavior to have, perhaps, and I want to exploit that kind of behavior in this talk. So the talk's divided mainly into a kind of a theory part and a sort of experimental part. So let's talk a bit about the theory part. So in robotics, we're very much accustomed to trying to do obstacle avoidance, but I want to, in this talk, say, let's just hit the obstacles and then worry about how we gracefully bounce away from the obstacles or reflect from the obstacles. And I want to come up with simple rules for determining how to do this kind of bounce. Now, the robot might not actually hit the boundary. It could just come up very close and then turn and then go away. It could use some kind of local sensing for doing that. So it doesn't have to be as simple as this so-called robot that I've kind of tricked you with, but we could add a little bit more to it. So don't always think we're going to be destroying the walls in this talk. It's not necessarily like that. So what kind of bouncing rules can we consider? Here's three very interesting ones. One of them is to follow this law of reflection here on the left. Just bounce exactly like a visibility ray going into a mirror. The next one is always go at a right angle compared to the angle that the robot came in at. Now, maybe you can turn right or left depending on which way you came in, so that has to be determined. Or another way to do it is ignore what the angle was coming in and then just bounce exactly in a direction normal to the surface. So each one is a little bit different. You know, the first one follows standard sort of rules of maybe how some kind of particle might behave in physics, and the next one is fixed with respect to the incoming angle, and the last one is fixed with respect to the surface. We'd like to think about information feedback bouncing rules. So there's some kind of what I'll call an information space that corresponds to the history of actions, history of sensor readings, and anything else that might be relevant to the problem, but it could be boiled down to something very, very simple. And we'd like to look at minimalism in this context. So that information could be transformed into something smaller via sensor fusion methods that are hopefully forgetting things that are irrelevant. So for example, maybe the information state that you make a bouncing rule just counts the number of bounces so far. Maybe if it's an even number of bounces, it does one rule, and if it's an odd number of bounces, it does another rule. So it could be very simple like that. I'm talking about dynamical systems here today, but I'm not doing it in the ordinary sort of differential equations way. I'm doing it by, in some sense, imagining that the differential equations have already been integrated. So I'm just talking about iterated maps. This is very closely related to classical Poincaré maps, where planetary motions are studied by putting up an orthogonal plane and then to the trajectories, and then looking at the positions where the planet, let's say, strikes the plane each time it comes around, and looking at that kind of pattern. So in that sense, it's a composition of mappings. The map F takes you from the plane to the plane. So in our work, the map will take you from the boundary to the boundary. Now this has been studied largely for the things I'm talking about today. The mathematicians have studied this largely in the context of what is called dynamical billiards, which I would say a largest fraction of people have studied this in Russian mathematics. But there's quite a few around the US and many other places in the world who have looked at these as well. And it becomes a kind of unusual Hamiltonian system. So there's a Hamiltonian system with volume-preserving flows that we're accustomed to. You see that in robotics as well. But they make this strange kind of bouncing ability along the boundary. So it's an unusual kind of Hamiltonian system. And then they ask, what does this really long trajectory look like? And there's entire well-known research papers by famous mathematicians who study just one problem, like what happens to the hockey puck in the Bunimovic Stadium. Turns out it has a really nice pattern to it. What happens in this case, the Sinai billiard. Sinai, by the way, was a student of Kolmogorov, and Bunimovic was a student of Sinai. So there's some, very sort of hardcore mathematics, let's say, going back to Kolmogorov. So you can imagine there's a lot of sort of rigorous things going on here and very beautiful mathematics. So I want to talk a little bit about ergodicity, and I don't need to use probabilities to talk about it. I find it nice to just cover at the level of measure theory. So you have some space you're exploring, set X, and take the usual sigma algebra and measure over that. It can just be Lebesgue measure if you like. That's the easiest way to think about it here. And then 4 is this transition map, and it's going to be assumed that it's one that preserves measure. So if you look at the volume or measure of the place where the set where you came from, and then look at the set where you ended up, those have to be the same. So this is going to be a volume preserving measure, or sorry, measure preserving mapping, or volume preserving mapping, if you like to call it volume. So we say that some measurable set A is F invariant mod 0 if the symmetric difference between where, let's say, the system came from and where it went to is 0. So there's almost no difference. The difference is a set of measure 0. Now, F is called ergodic if the only F invariant mod 0 sets we have, measurable sets we have, are either the entire space or the measure equals 0. What this intuitively means is that there's no way to trap the system. If you pick some set A that's not the whole space, not almost the whole space, or almost or a set of measure 0, but if you pick some kind of in-between, kind of normal kind of A, and keep applying this map F over and over again, it will break out and explore everywhere. It will bust out of any kind of trap, let's say. And that's the kind of behavior that weasel balls seem to have. A very simple example, suppose my map just applies rotations, and it's just rotations in the plane. So it's just like a yaw angle or something for a mobile robot, and it keeps applying rotations. If I rotate by 90 degrees, or pi over 2, and I start in this blue set, so this would be the A from this example. So here's my A. Here it's just these 4 blue intervals. It's a disjoint set. But if I start there and I rotate by 90 degrees, we stay there. And we can apply it as many times as we want, so that stays trapped there. So pi over 2 is not an example of being ergodic. And if we pick, however, an angle that is irrationally related to pi, like 3/2, it doesn't have a pi in it. So in that case, any place where, anytime we start with this set here, these blue intervals, and keep applying 3/2, you'll break out, right? And eventually, you keep iterating F again and again and again, and it will traverse the entire space, and it will become ergodic. One important thing about ergodic theory is that if I keep iterating these maps, and I apply some extra function, I look at some kind of statistic, let's say G, and then I keep iterating these maps, and I look at all of the points I land in, and then take some kind of, let's say, average, and the limit as number of points goes to infinity, and I compare that to the space average. There's a theorem by Birkhoff from the 1930s that if F is ergodic, then these time and space averages are the same almost everywhere. This means something very strong. For example, I could just take some subset A of my state space, and then it turns out that the frequency of visits to some particular place, right, just make the G function equal to 1, make it very kind of simple or a little bit trivial, but what that means is that the frequency of visits to some place in the space is merely proportional to its measure or volume, which is really strange. You get a very complicated spaces, and you end up visiting them not only infinitely often, but with a kind of distribution that fits exactly to the measure that you put on the space. So I think that's really incredible and powerful. There's also a result that for almost all polygons and almost all initial conditions, this billiard trajectory is in fact ergodic. Let me draw some little Python program I wrote that just goes bouncing around here. So this is a very complicated, simple polygon, and it is one really long trajectory here that eventually gets everywhere. And I did not design the polygon or design the initial conditions. I just click, 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 made some sort of random polygon. It's a very complicated one, and I picked some arbitrary initial condition, and you see it goes and covers everything. It might not look uniform yet. Oh, it's getting there now. So there's some tiny pockets maybe where, oh, as soon as I point it on it, it finds it. So it goes around covering everywhere, and it should have this uniform density property in the end. So that's nice. This almost all, by the way, is not measure 0. It involves meager sets and some other technicalities, so it's not quite the usual almost all sense. But anyway, it's very powerful. Now, if I look at the mathematics results and then I think about robotics, first of all, I don't care about doing bouncing laws that are measure-preserving maps. So I do not have to make Hamiltonian systems. Like this simple thing called the Bernoulli map at the bottom. If I just have the interval 0, 1, and I double every point in the interval, mod 1, so it just wraps around. So it's kind of like a circle, a flat circle in a topological sense. So if I just keep doing this, that's not measure preserving. A set A will just double in size. It starts expanding very quickly. This is fine. We can do this. I don't care. I'm not trying to study Hamiltonian systems. They're interesting, but for roboticists, we can take it or leave it. It depends on our problem. These problems don't really rely on that. And there are also many alternative bouncing rules. So I want to know which ones a robot can easily implement with very simple hardware, very simple computation, and have it robustly do that. And also ergodicity, it's a very strong condition, but maybe it's too much. Maybe it's overkill. What about just basic reachability? We're always talking about reachable sets for our robots. Can we command the robot to go where we want? Aside from having this perfect sort of frequency of visits as time goes to infinity. Also, we can ask questions about bouncing rules that lead to stability or limit cycles, which a lot of this talk seems like I'm saying let them be unstable, but sometimes we still might want to ask stability questions. And I'm particularly interested in, let's say in a general level as well, what can be achieved with information feedback. So what's the smallest kind of information we can put, some simple rules that will change the bouncing rules. And I think that's where most of the open problems lie. So here's an idea, I'll call it wildness. It's weaker than ergodic, but I think it's still useful. And this is based on a notion of topological transitivity that comes up in some of this literature, which is basically that a trajectory is topologically transitive with respect to some set C if for every open set, C is like the boundary or whatever you want to let it be. There's some possibilities in the bottom of the slide here. So you have different possibilities. Boundary P, this means boundary P here. And this is the interval of possible directions this trajectory could be, let's say, heading in. So it has the velocity direction, at least, as one of the variables you can consider. So these are the different possibilities. And so topological transitivity means that every open set inside of there will get hit by the trajectory at some point in some finite time. So no open set is left untouched is one way to look at it. So that's weaker than ergodic, but it's useful enough for robotics, I think. Now let's look at different rules. Well, if you apply this normal bounce rule that I talked about near the beginning of the talk, then then what happens if you're in some kind of corner like this, where the interior angle is less than 90 degrees, this normal direction motion will cause the trajectory to escape. So that's very interesting. When you study dynamical systems, you think about attraction and repulsion, and in this case, you get a kind of repeller. You can also get attractors. Sorry, just a second here. Oh yeah, okay, good. So this one is a repeller. In this case, you'll end up with a kind of attractor if you do the same law and the trajectory at some point, let's say, starts to the right of this green line. If you do this normal rule, it'll start moving over and cross the purple line, and then it will remain bouncing around inside of here forever. It cannot get past the purple line. So it's sort of like a black hole, and the green line here is the event horizon, and once the, let's say, spaceship or trajectory gets to the right of this, it keeps getting sucked in until it's actually in the black hole, which is to the right of the purple here. So it becomes a kind of attractor in this case. Another kind of attractor which we looked at, it's a little hard to see it here, I don't have an animation of it, but if this bounce that you do gets very close to 90 degrees, then you can start anywhere in this polygon and the trajectory will get trapped in the bottom. So we try to think about very simple rules and how to do repulsion and attraction. If you do a fixed angle bouncing rule, fixed right angle bouncing rule, so based on the direction you come in, you do a 90-degree bounce, then it'll become a natural attractor for corners, where this other one was a repeller, the normal bounce rule. This one becomes an attractor. We then started to think about how to develop algorithms that will calculate where these bouncing rules will end up after some number of iterations. And we wanted to allow it to handle different kinds of bouncing rules and also even handle uncertainty. So maybe the bounce angle that you leave at is bounded within some range. So we could still calculate these kinds of things. So in order to do that, we published some recent papers that construct some kind of finite representation for doing reachability and stability analysis. The basic idea is to take, let's say, an input polygon and divide it up into intervals along the boundary, from which we then characterize the bounces going from one interval to another interval. And the particular locations of these points are based on so-called visibility events. So you can see, for example, 5, 6. If I extend a ray down, it'll touch this one point. So if I'm on this side, I can't see the segment 5, 6, but over here I can. So it's based on these kind of critical events which show up in some classical low-dimensional motion planning results or even high-dimensional ones, and shows up in visibility in computational geometry. Which, by the way, Professor Ali Mohades in Amir Kabir University was my host the last time I was in Iran, and he does a lot of visibility work in computational geometry. So there's other results we had. So as I said, we can handle reasoning about kind of the flow of the system, even if there's an uncertainty interval of bouncing angles. And we also looked at conditions under which we get some kind of contraction mapping that reduces uncertainty, eventually resulting in something like this. We showed that for any convex polygon, there's a fixed bouncing rule that that has a stable limit cycle. Argued by a Banach contraction mapping, so that it'll keep going boing 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 boing, keep bouncing around, but it will converge to some fixed cycle asymptotically. Right, now let me jump over to experimental work that matches the theory at some level, but doesn't match it perfectly. But it's inspired largely by this theory. So recall the wildness condition, this topological transitivity. Well, I'm going to further assume that whatever system I build, it's going to be very hard to predict exactly what it's doing, so I have not performed perfect system identification. I just want to assume that it has this wildness property. I'll assume sensing is very limited or unavailable. And I just said it already, dynamical system modeling and identification is too difficult, but we have this wildness. Okay. And what kind of applications are we talking about here that this might be useful for? Maybe you have some micro or nano robots, so very small scale robotics, and in which case these kinds of conditions would tend to be true. You have swarms, maybe security applications. So those are some possibilities. I was thinking about how to control robots like this when you have these conditions. I was one time sitting in this hotel here in the US, and I was in the free breakfast hall, and the free breakfast hall closes at, I think, at 9:30, and I noticed the patron of the restaurant went over and just locked the door one way so that anyone who was still eating breakfast could go out, but no one new could come in. And I thought, what an interesting way to control humans. They're barely aware that they're being controlled, but they get manipulated very effectively. And I kind of thought that the humans are like the wild bodies in this case. They do kind of bounce around and do a bunch of erratic things, but they can be manipulated by this doorway called a gate and just limiting which way it flows. So we've seen this, in fact. If you go to perhaps a game stadium, you may see that you can enter the stadium, but you cannot exit, or the other way around. I guess in this case, it's probably exit. Usually to enter, you need to have your ticket, and they'll check you somewhere else, and this is maybe a way to exit. Or maybe a subway system is like this. Same thing for animals. You see like a kind of a one-way doggy door. And there's many examples of this in literature for herding animals and doing manipulation and things like that. So this also reminds me, especially when we get to a micro, nano, and then even molecular scale, this thing called Maxwell's demon, which seems to violate the second law of thermodynamics. Imagine if you had a gas and there's two chambers, and red corresponds to the fast-moving hotter particles. There's always going to be a distribution of, let's say, temperatures for the particles, and then you have these colder, slow-moving particles. If you could have a little demon that opens the door and lets the hot ones go by in one direction, unless the cold ones go by in the other direction, then you could separate them based on temperature or pressure or other kinds of things. But it turns out that this seems like this ought to be impossible because that would violate the second law of thermodynamics. So how do you resolve that? People have tried to sort of balance the equation again by this thing called generalized Jarzynski inequality, which takes into account the information that's needed to open the gate, and some amount of energy is required to get that information to open the gate. So I think that's fascinating. So you can't sort of cheat, in some sense, laws of thermodynamics. That would be a little bit weird. So we're on a much larger scale than this, and yes, we're going to expend energy at different times, so I think it's okay. So how do we define the world? We have something similar to like these Maxwell demon chambers. We have some number of regions of the environment, and they're going to be connected by gates. And then you should always think that there's a bipartite graph that corresponds to this collection of regions and gates. There's gate nodes and region nodes, and we're always alternating between these. So a robot, to get from one region to another, is going to have to go through a gate. So the strategy now is to design some wild bodies. So if we put them in a region, one or more robots inside of a region, they'll keep trying to hit the gates and do who knows what else. So we're going to design some collection of regions and potential gates. So in this sense, we're engineering the environment a little bit. So the robot system is the environment together with the robot. And maybe the robot will be very weak and kind of dumb, but the environment will have just a little bit of cleverness in it to make it do the right thing. Just like the environment had a little bit of cleverness in it to make the humans do the right thing in the breakfast hall. So then we'll determine a desired region sequence, what we would like the flow to be in terms of regions, and then we configure the gates in some way to cause these transitions. So what kind of things could we allow for the gates? Well, maybe we allow them to be fully open, then robots can flow back and forth. That's option 1. Options 2 or 3 are one directional motion, and option 4 is just completely block. That's for 2 adjacent regions. If we have a triple of regions, we can do much more complicated exchanges and things. There's several types of gates we're looking at. We'll have a static gate, so that they're just fixed, somehow designed as part of the environment. We'll have pliant gates where they have internal degrees of freedom, but there's no actuation. They just simply go with the flow, so to speak. And I'll show some examples of that. We have a controllable gate where we have actuators, and we can put sensors on it, connect sensors to it as well, and we can decide how to actuate the gate based on maybe what's happened previously, maybe it'll observe something approaching, things like this. And then finally, we can virtualize the entire idea of a gate by having the robots detect something that seems like a barrier it ought to not cross. So this is an example of a static gate. Reminds me of this dog trying to come out but can't go back in. And we just put some, this is a top view, here's some bricks here, and just some sheets of paper. Right? So we make a set of regions like this, and then we calculate a flow using whatever algorithm you want. So in this case, we want any robot or robots to flow from region 1 to region 5. So this shows how the gate should be configured. You can see that gate number 4 has to accept them flowing in from both sides here and then coming out to gate 5 because it's involving 3 regions. So this one has 2 inwards and 1 outward flow. These other ones that are just connecting pairs are these simple one-directional cases. And there's a lot of related work on these things of just kind of funneling or channeling motions in some way. So let me show an example of this. Very simple early experiment we did. So we want all of these so-called robots, just more of these balls, to end up in this region up here. And we just have simple pieces of paper. And I'll speed it up. Now, I don't say anything about optimality. I'm just saying, look, they're doing pretty reasonable amount of work for being so stupid. And so you might have to expend a lot more energy and design a lot more complex systems to do significantly better. But the white one is very stubborn at the end there, right? But eventually it seems to catch on. You hear some sped up voices there. Hopefully you can hear voices. The sound is not too important. There it goes. Finally, they all make it. So. We did the same thing with these like vibrating bugs. Perhaps you have these toys around in Iran. It looks like someone cut the head off a toothbrush and put a little vibrator motor on it, and then they can vibrate around. And so we did the same kind of experiment for these guys. In this case, they're moving around on some plates, and there's a slight drop in the elevation. So that's how we control them from coming backwards. So the red is the highest platform, then yellow, and then blue, and then white. So we get all 10 of these little vibrating bug-like guys to end up in the white region. Okay, it looks like we're tricking you. It's a top-down view, so you can't see that they're dropping a little bit. So it really looks like magic here. But they all eventually make it in. A little bit of stubbornness. Okay, the lost pink one. It's going around in circles too much. There we go. They all make it. So, okay. So this is ridiculously simple systems, but with just a little bit of gentle guidance from the environment. We've done things with these static gates of like patrolling, so we can get a robot to go around and around and around, cycling through regions. It becomes like a patrolling robot. We can do multi-body patrolling. We built some pliant gates. So in this case, they have an internal mode. So each time they allow a body or robot to go by, they change their mode somehow. So for example, this ball's coming by here, and the gate is in an L shape, and it's on a hinge right here. So after the ball goes by, the hinge rotates, the L rotates, so that another ball couldn't come through until a ball comes from right to left. So it'll control the number of balls in each room very carefully. It won't let it vary more than plus or minus 1. Oh, do I have a video of that? Let's see. Maybe I do. No, I don't. Okay, sorry. Thought I did. But anyway, you get the idea. We made a 4-way one as well, so it does some kind of complicated exchange. Then we made controllable gates, so we can do these 4 cases, like I said before. Block all passage, they're in slightly different order here. Allow passage in one direction only, or allow both directions of passage. And then we think about possible control laws for the gate now. Like maybe we just have some timer, and based on the time, it changes the mode of the gate. Or maybe based on some sensor observation, immediately it changes the gate. But generally speaking, based on any history of observations and actions and timings and things like that, we could change the modes. So we made a tilting ramp for that. Right, you can see the ramp in different configurations. If the ramp is horizontal but elevated, then these balls get stuck, and otherwise it's tilted one way or the other, and the balls can roll over and drop down. And then we had an emitter detector pair based on a simple laser that would be able to detect whether or not a ball is coming by, and whenever it does, it would change the mode. So what kinds of tasks can we solve with a system like this? It turns out fairly complicated ones. You can take, for example, and I just picked this because it was very popular. There were a lot of papers published on this, especially around a decade or so ago, on using linear-temporal logic to express the task you would like to do. Like, would you like to simply navigate to a region? Would you like to go through some sequences of regions, do some kind of coverage, maybe avoid certain regions, do some patrolling? So there's all kinds of, let's say, complicated tasks that can be expressed in this way. You can use then what's called a model checker to find a region sequence that satisfies the linear temporal logic formula. And I'm sorry, I'm not going over these formulas in detail here, but I'm just saying it's a very rich collection of tasks that can be solved. And then people usually develop hybrid control laws to solve these, and we can do it with these, let's say, ridiculously simple physical systems that we've developed. Then we started looking at controlling distributions of bodies. So I want to look at things like I have, let's say, indistinguishable bodies, and I consider a natural kind of transition graph. So there's these A, B, C kind of gateways, and then there's this natural transition graph that corresponds to all of the configurations, assuming these bodies are indistinguishable. If they're indistinguishable, all I care about is the number of bodies per region. And so we started studying simulations of bodies like this. And you can see there's gates connecting regions, and then we started looking at how they tend to behave. And we did another study where we try to control the distribution so that the densities, I'll start the video, and then you can see the densities end up in some desired configuration that we like. We had to share this lab with some computer vision people who were not very happy about our noisy experiments, but we dumped, I think, about 50 balls here, and based on the size of these ramps, these are fixed ramps here, so this is a static environment, we were able to control the distribution. So we let it run for a very long time, and then we got the distribution of balls to be something that we wanted. This gets kind of crazy. I'll just let it run a little while at 10x speed, but you get the idea. We're generally trying to control it. It's as if we're being Maxwell's demon here by the size of the gates. You can see that this upper region up here, the upper central one, has a lot of outflow, like double the size outflow, but only a tiny inflow here. This is one we wanted to have a very low density. So we prescribed the density. This shows what the densities should be, 2, 1, 4, 2, and we end up showing that it roughly converges to that in practice. And it should also by some theory that we developed. Then we virtualized the idea of gates. So we had a cheap color sensor detector here. We used a SERB open source design robot, and then we modified it, put a bumper on it, and put some little sensor on the front. And then we put red and white tape and bricks in the environment. And this tape serves as a kind of virtual wall. And then the robot can sense the color And based on its internal state, it can decide, oh, I should cross this, or oh, I should stay away, it's a wall. I need to do a bouncing motion. So for example, we made the tape like this, and we have this sequence of regions, and we'd like to have a couple of robots that just patrol back and forth. They start over here, and they're going to go back and forth and back and forth. So whether or not a piece of tape here, red or white, is open or closed depends on whether or not they just crossed one. So there's one information state that means white is open and red is closed, and another information state they have meaning white is closed and red is open. And they just keep alternating between these two internal states. So there's just like one bit in each of the robots for the decision logic. I'm going to really speed this up. They make it kind of look kind of stuck doing dumb things. They're doing bouncing inside the region. The red one got pretty lucky. The blue one got kind of unlucky. So the red one getting way ahead. But eventually the blue one figures out how to get to where it needs to go next. They'll also bounce off of each other. So that's the thing. They're just going back and forth. So just by these simple rules. So they have a bouncing rule built in, but then the way they view these virtual gates is based on, as I said, this opening or closing of them based on which one it went through last, which color it went through last. Here's another example, a little more complicated. So we have two moving bodies, and all we care about is whether or not they're in the same room together. So there's three different rooms here, and then there are these sensor beams, A, B, and C, or, actually, sorry, in this case, I'm going to interpret them not so much as sensor beams, but as gates. So our kind of virtual walls that may be opened or closed based on their internal state. So we developed a kind of 2-bit filter in some other work that we did with Fred Cohen and Benjamin Tovar. And the idea is that we can keep track of the status of the situation here by keeping 4 different states. One of them is internal states. One of them is the two bodies are together in some room. I don't know which room, but they're together. And then these other states around the periphery mean, for example, this one means they're in different rooms, but A is the separating boundary between them. And then by symmetry, there's a B version and a C version. And that's all we care about. We don't care about distinguishing which body is which. And in this T state, we don't even care which room they're in, just that they're together. So based on this, we developed a kind of control law based on this simple, let's say, filter that opens and closes these white, yellow, and red gates and forces the two robots to patrol clockwise. So we want them to patrol clockwise, that was specified, and we want them to never be in the same room together. So how do we get them to keep doing that, right? So just very, very simple. There is some communication needed because they'll need to know whether the other one crossed. So again, they're going to go around clockwise, and they're doing the usual bouncing stuff. But this one, the blue one can't get through the yellow because the red one, okay, the red one's stuck a little. There, now the red one's gone through the white, so now the blue one can cross the yellow. Now the red one can cross the red, and the blue one's blocked for the white, right? So these things happen here, right? Good. The red one was misbehaving that day. Let's see. And you get the idea. They keep going around in this pattern, doing this clockwise patrolling and keeping away from each other. We did some other experiments with water. We started gluing fins onto these weasel balls and put them in a kind of fountain by the engineering dean's office and let them flop around inside of there. It sort of worked, but it wasn't promising enough to do these same kinds of systems. Also very messy, and you get water inside with batteries and motors. It's not a good idea. I have a lot of respect for people who do underwater robots. We tried doing the same kind of things with live crickets, manipulating them into going into certain regions. And it was really fascinating because for a while, the crickets seemed to walk along and do what we wanted. And in this one example, a bunch of crickets ended up going up this ramp and landed in this room until the last cricket came. And it's okay, this sounds like a strange story, but it really seemed to look at the other crickets and contemplate what to do. And then it started walking along the boundary here. and then eventually gave up and just jumped in with his friends. So that was really bizarre. So already, I think as soon as you go to some biological organism, behaviors are already much more complex. All right, so let me make some conclusions here, and then I will be very happy to take some questions. So we have this general paradigm, which I think is a very beautiful theory of bouncing. So, and I feel like it awaits to be fully explored. There are so many interesting connections here to ergodicity, reachability, stability, and information spaces, trying to figure out what are the minimal kinds of filters, what kind of sensors, what kind of minimal, let's say, adaptations of the environment we can do in order to control a bunch of bodies. And remember, the key point here is let them be unstable, let them behave wildly in some kind of regime where there's minimal sensing, minimal communication, minimal computation, and maybe minimal control capabilities. But we're still able to gently guide them and make them do interesting things. And what you saw on a lot of these examples for the practical parts is that small environment modifications are okay to gently control the robots. And as I said, that was largely inspired by interactions with humans and the ways that humans have been controlled and manipulated. So if we look at the key challenges, what we need is more mathematical analysis of balancing rule dynamics. So we'd like to really understand these better, and we just sort of did some part of that, but I think there's a lot of opportunities that we would look forward to people working on this. It's also very interesting to associate what tasks can be solved with different kinds of bouncing rules and environments. Some of these rules we just said, you get attractors, like the robot or the state will be attracted to a corner, for example, but we'd like to really understand more generally the connection between task solvability and these bouncing rules. We need better algorithms, visibility kinds of algorithms for characterizing the dynamical system properties. So we want to understand how these work and how these behave, how to calculate these flows for different kinds of settings and such. And then there's more actual mechanical systems to design of wild bodies and gate structures. There's also stochastic versions of these that you could make. So I talked about just perfect bouncing laws today and about a little bit about bounded uncertainty, but much more could be explored there. But just want to point out that there's stochastic versions of this as well. We did a little bit of analysis on that in some of our works, but there's much more to be done in a kind of stochastic setting. Why not just bounce in a random direction? What does that give you? I think most of the time it'll give you something worse, but there may be some analysis tools that can be used that give you some interesting insights. Also, one final statement here is if you'd like to see another keynote that I gave fairly recently last year, it covers a lot of my works and also some perspective on industry and university research and comparing the cultures and such. So you might find that interesting. I found a lot of students give me good feedback on that. So I encourage you to take a look for that. Look for my ICRoM 2020 keynote. Okay, so thank you very much. That's the formal presentation part. I think it's pretty good. It maybe ended a few minutes earlier than I had planned, but I'm very happy anyway to take questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, dear Professor LaValle, for a very nice speech. Go to question part, dear Professor.
I see some questions in the text part.
Yes,
maybe I can.
Text part.
That's great. So I'll try to look. Oh. I can see them popping in now. Let me see if I can scroll them. Yes. Okay. So one question is, in bouncing, do we have real physical interaction? If yes, that is fine for soft robots. What about solid mobile robots? If not, I can imagine that you use the Poincare levels, then you do make computation with such simple robots. So, or then how do you make computation? Well, if you have hard robots, I mean, then that's a good point. What you can do is have some proximity sensor, and then as the robot gets close to the environment, it will say, okay, this is a virtual contact now, and the robot will say, I'm going to do some transformation, some rotation to get away from that. You could even do it for a robot manipulator. You could have it detect that it's getting close to collision and then decide to do some motion that's kind of opposite to that based on some kind of reflection law. So I think this thing can be done in a very safe way. It's just a very different way to think about traveling through the environment. You could make a robot path planning, motion planning algorithm that just does some kind of bouncing even through the configuration space, although that's much higher dimensional than what I talked about today. But that kind of thing can work just fine. So either the robot can think with its own simulator about what it should do and then do planning based on that. But then the actual bouncing does not have to truly occur. Okay. So another question, dear Steve. Thanks for the very interesting talk. Some experiments seem to be even magical with such simple toys. Thank you very much. So my question is, if you found connection between these theories and biological simple creatures like cockroaches. Oh, you might have asked that before I actually got to cockroaches, and I said a little bit about that. So yeah, that was exactly what we were wondering. And it seems like maybe we need to get even lower, like down to paramecia or roundworms, or I don't know, something to try to get similar behaviors. It seemed like crickets or cockroaches are too clever for us. So it is an interesting question. Next question: is the control strategy of these robots autonomous and distributed or centralized manner, and why? I think that's a great question. And in one of the cases when I had these 3 rooms that the robots had to go around in circles and patrol, some communication was needed because the activation of the virtual gates depended on both robots, or the knowledge of what both robots are doing, whether not their precise states, but whether or not they went through the gates. So how could that be implemented? It could be a direct robot-to-robot communication, or it could be that the gate sends a local signal and the robot has a sensor that detects that, right? And so that would be fun. It could have been that the gates were mechanical and flipping, but we decided not to do it in that case. We virtualized it. So I really think it depends on the problem. You have opportunities here to use centralized control, or you can do it in this in some ways that are distributed. So either one is kind of fine. So next question: do you think by adding some low-cost sensors with low profile like IMUs can make things more accurate and easy? Yeah, we did some experiments with these weasel balls and trying to put an IMU on it, and it's very tricky because it changes the mechanics of the system here. So so it ended up not kind of rolling around in the same way. Now it's possible to make all the circuitry really small and be very, very clever about it, but we never went sort of far enough along those lines. I thought it might be interesting to just take one of these weasel balls, put an IMU in it, let it bounce around, and then have it report back a geometric map, which I think was pretty ambitious. I thought it'd be really cool. Maybe that's something to try with deep learning or something. But it seems like enough information should be there, but we never got far enough on that. So I think it's worth playing around with. But keep in mind that most of this talk, at least if you follow the philosophy of this talk, we're trying to show what you can do while avoiding accuracy. So we're not really trying to do anything highly accurate, other than being accurate about the robots getting to the right goal, getting where we want them to go.
Dear Steve, there is one more question in the chat box, which calls, does the bouncing only work for the motion planning? Just missed it. Does the bouncing only work for the motion planning? What about the 2-level control, since the robots are very simple?
Okay. Sorry, I missed that one. I don't see it on my chat. I don't know why. Yeah, I think there's many ways to do it. I mean, I don't know if I would call what you've seen here motion planning, right? Motion planning usually involves doing a complete simulation, either in the robot's brain or in some computer that's going to download, that's going to send instructions to be downloaded to the robot. So the robot's usually doing a full simulation with collision checking and understanding, if I move there, this will happen. If I move there, this will happen. And it has a complete knowledge of all of the obstacles. Keep in mind here that all of this work has been avoiding that. There's no real map given to the robots ever in this work, and the closest it gets to knowing things about its environment is just knowing whether these virtual gates are opened or closed in some sense. But it only has a bit or two of information about that, so it has very, very little. So I think it starts to break down this very classical, established for decades hierarchy between, generating a motion plan, then having a low-level controller go and follow it. In this case, it's just letting the body be kind of wild. It's both low and high level together in some sense. I think it's an interesting question. Maybe the person who asked it can type the second part to that or something if I didn't answer it well.
Sorry, Stephen, I have a further question about the first one. When you showed that the state machine, which is made from the temporal logic, I can imagine that this state machine came from the motion planning. But my question is that what is the condition for leaving each state? So in this way, I call it a low-level control. And for such a simple robots, I think that it might be very challenging to switch from one state to another state because you may have an unstable entire system in total.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I see what you mean. Yeah, I see what you mean. That's a good point. At the point when I've declared that there's a set of regions, then that does look like planning. I almost think of that stage as being done by the human because we were then engineering the environment a little bit. But so it's sort of like there's like a master robot or something that would be doing that planning, and then the little guys go and do the work, right? And I think I understand your question, and it really depends. I think it depends very greatly on what types of systems you're developing. So I'm leaving these robots so-called unstable in some way, but if you looked at the robots we built, they were very stable differential drive robots that we could rotate around and get them to behave in somewhat reasonable ways and then execute these balances. Whereas this was some kind of fairly wild system just doing crazy things. But then we couldn't program this, or we couldn't make it do something a little bit more complicated. So I hope that addresses your question or comment.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. Because as long as you are working with the flexible robot, let's say soft robots, then there is no any issue because if your robot is not that stable, so it doesn't make any problem. But imagine that you are working with the solid robots or maybe with drones. So if you have a very simple crash, then it will be a mess.
Yeah, very good point. And so I like that comment, and I think that suggests that if you're going to apply this and you're going to leave the low-level part, you'll say the low-level control should probably be stable if you have a fragile robot. So that part you would want to be very careful about because you're going to have to do, let's say, a virtual bounce. But if you have a soft robot, you can let it do, let's say, a sloppy bounce, and just let it slop around and do whatever. It's not going to harm itself. But even in the case where the robot is fragile, I still think these theoretical methods, these techniques generally apply. It's just that the low-level system has to have internal stability, so it can't be as unstable and unobservable as we've just said. You do have to have more information. So I think that fragility of the robot does seem to always imply some additional needs for information, right? So and then feedback controls that would stabilize that. So I think that's a good point.
Okay, thanks. By the way, I have a question. I think the only source of input is the vision in this system. If I'm correct, so I was thinking that is that possible to combine the vision data with the dynamics of your robots? In this case, your robots are very simple. You don't care about the dynamics. But imagine that you, when you use the, let's say, cheap IMU and try to combine the information from the dynamics and combine it with the vision, you may have more sophisticated input for your entire system.
Yeah. Well, the point here is to show, and it's a little bit absurdist. I'm trying to be minimalist to the extreme to provoke people to think very carefully. So more information often seems better, but I think it's often leads to complications because a bunch of information that's bad is not necessarily good, or a bunch of information that ends up requiring huge amounts of computation is not necessarily good. So this work was designed to be thought-provoking, not sort of go and solve everyone's problems. I also want to point out, I don't think we had computer vision in here, except for the case of a very simple, like 1-pixel camera, let's say, that could detect based on simple reflection what the color is of the tape that it's crossing. And that was only one family of implementations. A lot of the implementations just involve these simple balls, and they certainly didn't have vision. But in the case of these robots that can do the virtual gates, it's very weak vision, right? So I think it's fascinating to add a little bit more information. Like maybe you can know, try to estimate how far the robot has gone total by its rolling, and maybe some very simple odometry, and then you might want to feed that into the bouncing laws and change how you bounce based on that. So you could start playing games like that, and that could get interesting. But I just want to point out, of course, one could always say, isn't it better to have more sensors? And we're very accustomed to that way of thinking. I'm trying to provoke some kind of, let's say, contrarian thinking here.
Thanks for the answer.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
Okay, thank you so much. Dear Dr. Taburad, have any question, or the question isn't?
No, I guess all the questions are addressed by Steve. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, well, thank you all very much, and I enjoyed very much having the opportunity to speak here, and look forward to visiting you all in Iran someday.
Thank you very much for your very excellent speech, dear Professor LaValle.
Just a final note: we have a poem in Iran, Iranian poetry that I said it in Farsi and then translated in English, if you don't mind. It said that چشم‌ها را باید شست، گونه‌ای دیگر باید دید. The translation is that you should wash your eyes and should look in another way to the nature. I think this is a very, very close relation with what you are doing in this type of research. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for that. Perhaps you can send me that quote. I really like that. And I remember when I went to Shiraz, I saw the gardens of Hafez, and I got a sense of how dear the poetry is, the classical poetry to the Iranian people. So that's a very nice ending. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you, dear Professor, for joining with us in this conference and very excellent speech. I hope to see you in Iran as soon as possible.
Thank you very much. Good luck with the rest of your conference and the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
خب عزیزانی که همراه ما هستن، خدا قوت و خسته نباشید. واقعا بی‌نظیر بود. خب این بخشی که صحبت میشد در موردش، حالا در ادامه داستان دعوت میکنم ازتون که به سایت اصلی کنفرانس مراجعه بفرمایید. در روم‌های مختلف بحث رو ادامه میدیم انشالله تا دوباره به آیین اختتامیه بخوایم برگردیم. انشالله در روم‌های کنفرانس میبینمتون. به این آخرین بخش ها هم سر بزنیم و خودمون رو آماده کنیم برای آیین اختتامیه نهمین دوره از کنفرانس. سپاسگزارم از حضورتون.
آقای جان، یه نکته رو من می‌خواستم شما اگر ممکن باشه قید بکنید که ما در اختتامیه جوایز بهترین مقالات و همچنین به اصطلاح بهترین طرح‌های خلاقیت رو داریم. به خصوص دانشجویانی که همراه هستند خواهش میکنم که بفرمایید اگر ممکن باشه حضور پیدا بکنن که این بخش جذاب رو هم با حضور دانشجوها داشته باشیم.
خودتون که به قشنگترین نحوی استاد گفتید، دقیقاً اختتامیه همیشه برای ما بخش هیجان انگیز داستان هست، چه برای دانشجویان عزیزی که تو این 2-3 روز تلاش کردن، چه برای دانش آموزان و عزیزانی که توی بخش خلاقیت شرکت داشتن. خلاصه برای هممون خیلی جذاب هست، چون بالاخره نتایج فاینالیست های ما مشخص میشن و نتایج برای همراهمون حتما در اختتامیه باشید دوستان. البته که همه عزیزانی که تلاش کردن مقاله ای رو نوشتن، حالا ارائه دادن یا به صورت پوستر بوده در بخش‌های مختلف. طبیعتاً آدم‌هایی هستن که میتونیم اونها رو موفق برنده بدونیم و صرفاً این برای جایزه برای موتیویت کردن بیشتر هست. همراهمون باشین که انشالله تو بخش اختتامی خبرهای جذاب زیاد داریم. خیلی سپاسگزارم.